Welcome back to another Read with Miss K. Today we are going to be reading the next short story from The World's Worst Children. Now I've had a bit of a quick read through of this one, a pre-read. Let's just say it's very interesting and can make you a little bit squirmy. So we'll see how we go. It is called Nigel Knit Boy. Yes, you heard that correctly. Nigel Knit Boy. So we'll see how we go. Knits are itchy, they're scratchy, they're scritchy, and they're a nuisance. Not for Nigel. Nigel was a boy who could never have enough knits. He wanted his hair crawling with them. Our tale begins on the morning that Nigel woke up to discover that he had a knit in his hair. Most of us would be appalled and immediately try to evict the knit, but not Nigel. He was delighted. The boy called this knit Mr. Henderson. Nigel didn't have a cat or a dog or a hamster, so he treated his knit like a pet. He made sure he never combed his hair because knits hate combs. And soon Nigel's hair was wild and frizzy, like a great big bush. Nigel fed Mr. Henderson tidbits of dandruff, knits love dandruff, in the hope of training him to do tricks, like leaping from one side of Nigel's head to the other. Soon afterwards, Nigel heard of another child at school who had knits. Her name was Tina Ting. Nigel wanted Tina's knits more than anything in the world. He wanted knits, knits, and more knits. At break time, Nigel chased the poor girl around the playground. "What do you want?" cried Tina tearfully. "I'm not playing it." "I want your knits," replied the boy. "My knits? Are you nuts?" yelled the girl. "Yes, I'm nuts for knits," said Nigel. The boy tripped over a skateboard and flew through the air towards her. Clonk. Their heads bashed, and in an instant, Tina's knits crawled onto Nigel's head. A little dazed, the boy was nonetheless happy. Now Mr. Henderson had some company. The next day, Nigel heard of a boy in school who had knits, Colin Clont. Nigel wanted those knits so badly, so he chased Colin down the corridor and cornered him in the toilets. The trembling boy locked himself in a cubicle, but Nigel wouldn't give up. He climbed over the top of the next cubicle and dangled upside down from the ceiling. Nigel and Colin's heads knocked together, and once again, the knits sprang across to Nigel's head. Even the school cat was not safe from Nigel's advances. When Nigel was told that Minky the cat also had knits, he pursued the poor creature across the football field. Once he caught the cat, he sellotaped it to his head. It looked like a very unconvincing wig. Still, one by one, the cat's knits bounded onto Nigel's head. Soon Nigel had so many knits that even his knits had knits. He stopped counting them at 1,000,003. Now you may be wondering why Nigel wanted a beautiful head of knits. Please let me explain. Ever since he was a toddler, Nigel had spent his days reading comics. The boy was short for his age, if you don't count the wild bush of hair on top of his head, and he wanted to be strong and powerful like the characters in his comics. However, Nigel had had a very normal upbringing. He'd not been lucky enough to be bitten by a radioactive spider, or come from a Viking planet, or fallen down a well of bats. Besides, he found superheroes a bit boring. They were always doing good. The supervillains were so much more thrilling. Before long, naughty Nigel had a plan. One morning, as the boy was standing in the bathroom cleaning his teeth, he looked at himself in the mirror. His hair was now so much a bush, more of a hedge. Nigel could not remember the last time he had either combed it or cut it. Buzzing in and out of his hedgerow of hair were billions of knits, forming a dark cloud around him. The day has finally come. My superpower is ready. From this day on, the world will know me only as Knit Boy. Best of all, the name hadn't already been taken. So now that Nigel had all of his knits, he went about getting a costume made. Fortunately, the boy's Auntie Pat was quite good at sewing and put together a supervillain costume for her nephew in no time. Nigel had his superpower. He had his name, he had his costume on. He was Knit Boy. At once, he began his supervillainy. The next morning, he strode into school, his cape flapping in the wind. First, Nigel vowed to get revenge on his geography teacher, Mr. Drummond. Nigel found geography boring and spent most of his lessons reading comic books. Mr. Drumhum had given the boy detention after detention, but now Knit Boy stood at the door of the classroom. Initially, there were hoots of laughter from the other children. With what his costume and shriveled of hair, that would be supervillain did look quite a sight. However, the laughter turned to silence and awe as Knit Boy called out his first command. Nits, swarm! The billions of nits that were whirling around his head formed a black mass next to him. Nigel, what on earth do you think you're doing? Demanded Mr. Drumhum. Nits, attack! Shouted the boy. They swarmed the geography teacher, nipping him all over with tiny nit claws. Ah! Screamed Mr. Drumhum as he raced around the classroom. All his pupils pressed their faces up against the windows to watch their teacher. The man was trying desperately to tend off the nits. He was hopping and spinning and slapping himself as he sped across the playing field towards the school pond. He then leapt in with a giant splosh. He finally had some relief from the nit-nips. Though now he was submerged in green water with a fat frog sitting on his head. Nitboy smiled to himself. This was going to be fun. Next he marched across the playground to the dining hall. The dinner lady, Mrs. Droop, was something of a dragon. Boiled broccoli was her signature dish. Whatever you choose, even jam, roly-poly and custard, Mrs. Droop would spoon heaps of green, watery mush on top. Then she would stalk up and down the dining tables, twirling her ladle like a baton, threatening to rack the knuckles of anyone who didn't eat up every last mouthful. Nigel hated broccoli. If Superman fed kryptonite, Nitboy was terrified of broccoli. Now he was to get revenge on this woman who'd made him eat a mountain of it. Nigel, she purred as she strode in, why have you got your pants on over your trousers? Mrs. Droop's smile was wiped off her face as soon as Nitboy shouted out his next command. Nits to the broccoli! I'm not having your blasted head lice messing with my delicious broccoli, protested the dinner lady. Too late. The nits had swarmed into a whirling tornado. Mrs. Droop stood open-mouthed in shock as twisting vortex spun over to her precious trays of broccoli. Then the tornado started firing the damp, limp vegetable straight at Mrs. Droop. Soggy floret after soggy floret splattered across the woman's face until Mrs. Droop was a damp, green vegetable mess. Now Nitboy was ready to have his revenge on his headmaster. The elderly Mrs. Sourchops had suspended Nigel from school after his 10th detention for reading comic books in lessons. The headmaster was a small and timid man, so Nitboy thought he would frighten him. Nigel stood in the playground just below the window of the headmaster's office. He closed his eyes in concentration. Nits, shapeshift, he ordered. Slowly, the tiny insects swarmed together into a shape of giant supernet. They were able to read their master's mind. As the boy kept his eyes tightly shut, a look of intense concentration on his face, the giant net shape surged upwards to the headmaster's window. It banged on the glass with a huge claw. Mr. Sourchop swiveled around in his chair and shrieked, "No!" The giant net bashed its great head against the window, breaking the glass. "Help!" screamed the headmaster as he dashed out of his office. Running into the playground, Mr. Sourchop spotted a wheelie bin. Checking behind himself, if all the time with a giant supernet, the little old man pushed the bin as hard as he could before leaping into it as he was speeding away. Finally, Nitboy opened his eyes and watched in glee as his headmaster trundled across the playground in the bin. It bashed into a long wall, clang, sending the old man flying through the air straight into a tree trunk. The nits swarmed back to their master's head as Nigel strode out of the school gates. There was plenty more supervillainy to be done. Not long after, Nitboy arrived in the market square, which was teeming with bargain hunters. Using his powers, Nigel spelt out the letters of a rude word in the sky. Bottoms. One old lady was shocked. She fainted at the sight. Next, Nitboy turned his attention to the school toy shop. The supervillain ordered his nits to steal every single item in the store, including the money. The shop owner chased the boy down the street, but he was whacked over by a head of nits with one of his own giant teddy bears. Yet there was still more chaos and destruction to come. Suddenly, lights flashed and sirens wailed. The police had been sent to stop Nigel from creating further mayhem. But Nitboy ordered his nits to attack the police car, and they swarmed onto its windscreen. The glass became so thick that the policeman's crashed straight into the window of an optician's. Nothing could stop Nitboy now. He felt invincible. Soon the whole world would kneel before him. All hail Nitboy! Later that night, Nigel had put on his pajamas and was lying in bed. Even supervillains need their sleep. The boy was dreaming up the next day's evil schemes. However, outside in the street stood the townsfolk, armed not with flaming torches and pitchforks, as a tradition with angry mobs, but with an array of brushes and combs. Nitboy had to be robbed of his powers, and there was only one way to do that. They began to chant, "Comb his hair! Comb his hair!" The chant became louder and louder as the mob grew angrier and angrier. Nigel leapt from his bed and peeked out the window. Looking down, he saw more and more people rushing out of their houses to join the horde. In a swirling whirl of nits, Nigel charged out of his pyjamas to become Knit Boy. He marched outside and approached the mob with his Wellington boots on and his cape, which was really one of his mum's old skirts, flapping in the wind. Knit Boy felt ready to take on the world. His millions of knits had now multiplied into billions or maybe even trillions. They buzzed around his head, blacking out the scattering of the stars in the night sky. "There he is," shouted someone. "It's Knit Boy, get him!" The mob surged forward, brandishing their combs. The old lady who'd fainted in the market square was holding a large bottle of anti-knit shampoo called Knit Blitz. Unable to contain her anger a moment longer, the old lady hurled the bottle at Nigel. It bounced off his hair and hit her on the head, knocking her out cold. The boy still stood his ground. Once again, he commanded his nits. "Nits, lift!" They swooped towards to create a hoverboard under the master's feet. Then they lifted him off the ground with laughable ease. The crowd gasped into shock. The supervillain could actually fly. The boy zoomed through the night sky, performing an impressive loop-the-loop. "Now go back to your homes or you will feel the full force of my power." The townsfolk began muttering to each other dejectedly. They knew they were beaten, yet still no one moved. "Disperse!" Knit Boy ordered the crowd. But his nits must have thought he was talking to them. Nits are not known for their intelligence. As far as I know, no knit has performed brain surgery or been involved in rocket science. So the nits dispersed. Led by Mr. Henderson, they all buzzed off in different directions, disappearing into the sky. Knit Boy looked down at the people below. He gulped as he began to plummet downwards. He tumbled through the air, desperately flapping his arms. "Help!" The crowd surged out of the way, and Nigel landed headfirst on the pavement. Fortunately, such was the volume of hair on his head that he survived the fall without any injury. "Grab him!" someone shouted. Nigel was carted off to the local hairdresser's, where his hair was washed with Knit Blitz shampoo, and he was given a very sensible short back and sides. All remaining nits or knit eggs were combed out of Nigel's hair, and he had to make a promise in front of the whole town. "I solemnly swear never ever to be Knit Boy again." You might be surprised to learn that even though he was one of the world's worst children, Nigel kept his promise. Knit Boy was never seen again. However, sometime later, Nigel came up with another supervillain to be. From now on, he would be known as Veruca Boy, a supervillain who refused to wear a plastic sock at the swimming pool, thereby unleashing a plague of Verucas on the world. And the best part was that Nigel could reuse the cape that was really his mum's old skirt. I hope that didn't make you too squirmy. It was a very interesting way that he's used his superpower. I'm not too sure if I would call it a superpower, but made for a funny story. Wonderful, so join me next time for another chapter. Remember to subscribe because I will upload a chapter every school day, and I shall see you next time. See you later.